Hey guys, my name is Nick and welcome back to the channel. Welcome to part 2 of painting the OSIRON Dreadnought from Forgeworld. So on screen now, this is the 30k version. I'm going to be painting this in blue for my 40k versions for my 1000 Suns. So yeah, catch up with part 1 where we go through magnetising, building and preparing that model. And we've taken it all the way up to the base coat. This video we're going to highlight all the blue up. And because that is quite a long process, I'm going to cut the video there. I am actually going to turn this into a 3-part series. So the final piece will be the remaining details, any decals and so on that we add, and then the final base. So this is going to be the final scheme that we're aiming for here. So this is the regular 1000 Suns Contemptor Dreadnought. The OSIRON is the bling version. So without further ado, let's get straight into the video. So by way of a catch-up, this is the components that we'd got to at the end of the last video. So everything's been built but in sub-assemblies, and we've primed it all with several thin coats of 1000 Suns blue. So we've got the torso on its own here, we've got the legs, we've got the 2 arm sockets or the upper shoulders, and then we've got the single weapon that we're going to be running with here. I will be adding the regular type of weapons for the ranged weapons on the other arm, but that's not going to be blue, so that's not part of this video. In parallel to painting that though, I am going to be doing a 1000 Suns Vindicator, just to show you that the same techniques can be applied to a bit more of a box chunky vehicle. So this is at the same stage as well, built, primed, assembled and base coated in 1000 Suns blue. The first stage then is to highlight up that blue that we've already got so far. So we're going to take our 1000 Suns blue, a mixing pot and some armour blue, and we're going to do this at about 3:1 ratio. So 3 parts 1000 Suns blue, 1 part armour blue, and we're going to put that into the mixing pot. Now what I've done to do that is I've used a little bit of Tamiya thinners, just a tiny little bit here, just to thin the paint so it goes through the airbrush, and then I put 6 large dollops of 1000 Suns blue in and 2 large dollops of armour blue to give me that 3:1 ratio. So we're going to stick this through the airbrush. You can hand paint it if you wanted to, and you'd probably want to use like a feathering technique, or if you really want to spend that extra bit of time on it, then you would wet blend. But with an airbrush it makes it a little bit quicker. So clearing everything out the way, we're going to start on the torso. Now I'm going to be aiming this from the underneath on the large pieces. I'm just making sure the airbrush is running true there. So just exactly where you can see on the screen really. It's doesn't require too much explanation, but we're going to leave the darker part towards the ridge in the middle of the torso and just highlight the very low piece. Doesn't matter if you go over any of the other details, we're going to be blocking that in with gold later. We're just trying to lay down a thin version of this mix. It doesn't look too much of a change of difference, but it does aid the transition when we go for the next stage. So I'm also going to be applying that to just around the top of the torso there, and then we're going to move on to the very top of the sarcophagus. But we're also going to be doing around the engine exhaust vents as well, the power pack exhaust vents. So again, just sort of at the bottom, probably going about 2/3 of the way up. That's the key here, is you leave 1/3 of it at the original base colour, and then we go 2/3 with this, and then we go 1/3 with the final mix, which we'll get to very shortly. For the very top of the sarcophagus, we're going to work from back to front. So same technique, about 2/3 of the way up with this particular mix towards the big headdress that is at the front of the model. So camera is directly over the airbrush, which really doesn't help. But you can see it when it's wet. You can just see the shine of the paint there, leaving that the darker area towards the headdress piece, the top piece, and then that blend just from the back to front. We can now move on to some of the other components. Then we're going to do a very similar style. So on the legs then we're going to be aiming all over the front of the toes and then all around the Shin Armor. Now the Shin Armor does contain lots of detail, but this part we're just trying to get the blue in, and then once we overpaint all the detail with blingy gold or whatever other colours we're going to use here, it won't make too much of a difference because that will all disappear. So all around the toes, focusing on the fronts of the toes and across the top, but making sure that we don't airbrush into the real big recess at the back, just as the leg shin arm or the greaves join the toes. And then what we're going to do, as you can see here quite clearly, I hope, on the screen, is that side leg armour, which is what we're going to replicate on all 4 sides of the legs and the backs. Again, starting at the bottom, working our way 2/3 of the way up each leg with the airbrush, just leaving that darker original Thousand Suns blue right at the very top. And don't forget the backs of the feet as well. So again, start at the bottom, work your way up, but just don't aim the airbrush into the stronger recess between that lower leg armour. Bit tricky trying to get into the where are we there, on the inside of the legs, kind of doing the same thing again, 2/3 of the way up, exactly as we did on the other side, and again on this side. So there are a number of cartouches, I think is the correct word, having been to Egypt a few times, in those leg armours. Doesn't really matter, we're going to overpaint those as we come to the detail. Then finally, just at the very tops of those thigh armour panels, again starting at the back working towards the middle, and then starting at the front working towards the middle, just a little bit of that blue. It doesn't go all the way to the middle, we leave that at the darkest point. Seems a bit weird, but it seems to work. Normally you'd highlight right at the very top, but this technique seems to really work for me. It kind of makes it a bit popish, especially when we come to do the edge highlights, or the internal GW cartoony kind of highlight, I guess it is. It's not really grimdark or Forgeworld style, but it is the standard GW style. A little bit of blue on those arm panels as well, basically where the weapon mounts are. The rest of it is all super detailed, so we don't need to worry about those. So it's just those little rectangles on the arm joints. So below those are the little circles with the magnets in from the first video, and those join the weapon arms. On the big power fist then, kind of aiming, yeah, more or less at the top on this one. Just depending on the pose of the weapon, it will vary where you really want to apply the highlight, but just use sort of your imagination a little bit. When we come to the blocky type vehicle, we're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to start at the bottom and go 2/3 of the way up each of the sides, rear, and when we come to the top, we'll do something vaguely similar. Now it's very difficult to see the transition because we are 2/3 still of our base coat, but it will help with the next coat to blend that in. So we're just going from the bottom, and as you can see, I'm sort of moving the airbrush from the bottom upwards in sort of upward strokes. Just as you can see, it's quite clear with that bit of footage on that rear access panel there. So you start at the bottom, work your way up about 2/3 of the way. Now ideally you want to overmix a little bit too much paint so that you've still got some running in your little pot. What we're going to do now is reverse that mix to be 2/3 Ahriman blue, 1/3 Thousand Suns blue. So I'm going to take some large dollops of Ahriman blue here into our original mix within that pot to readjust that ratio. Now you can have a little mix around, a little play to make sure you're happy with that blend. If you're going to be taking this to the next level, or you are going to be wet blending this, you probably want to go 3/4, sort of 3:4 ratio, then a 2:1 ratio, then what's the next one, a 1/4 ratio, and then pure Ahriman for the edge highlights and so on. So yeah, the more transitions you've got, the more mixes that you put in, the smoother your wet blend will be. But for an airbrush, as I said, I'm going 3:1, then 1:3. And that will be our 2 airbrush stages. After that, it's all back to the hairy brush and to paint it manually. So as I said a little bit earlier then, we're going to start at the bottom and just work 1/3 of the way up each of these little armour panels then. So you use an awful lot less paint. And you can see here, just going around those engine panels, we've done the bottom of the armour, and then we're just going to go to the top headdress. And that's pretty much it. And then we'll move on to the other pieces as well. So as I said, from the first mix is 1/3 of the way up, is 2/3 of the way up. This mix is 1/3 of the way up. And you can see just on the sort of the newspaper, just in the background, the difference in colour. It is a little bit brighter. Just at the top of my fingertip, underneath, there we go. You can just about see it to the right of the sarcophagus. You can see how much brighter when you add that Ahriman blue in, what that transition looks like. On the top of the sarcophagus again, just going 1/3 of the way in from the back. Now if you do overspray a little bit behind it, doesn't matter because that's going to get some metallics. especially around the engine exhausts and so on. But with that wet paint, you can see just how far I've gone up with it. It's a very small touch. And now we're going to move back onto the legs, do exactly the same thing as we did before. We'll start at the toes, and this time we're going to go sort of a third of the way back again, so really kind of focusing on the top front highest points of the toes and let the airbrush spray do the work. When we come to the side panels, again, we're just going to go a third of the way up, so you can see it's not very far at all. Just on the rear of the feet, the rear of those leg panels, we're just going that little bit third up. So we now have basically 3 different colour transitions, and that airbrush action will help blend that in. Just on the inside of the legs then, again, a little bit tricky to try and reach. You could have built this with the legs separately, but I always find it helps knowing where to apply the colour before I assemble it, especially when you're doing sub-assemblies. I think this was just about manageable. If you put the torso on and glued all that together, you might have had a bit more of a problem. So I think this is a suitable size set of sub-assemblies to work on your Contemptor Dreadnoughts. Once the legs are done, don't forget the weapon arms and the shoulders as well. So this just a little bit of a touch. You can see I'm just sort of feathering the trigger a little bit just to get the right amount of paint on in my mind. And then those 2 tiny little horizontal boxes on the side of the upper shoulders. And that's pretty much it. That is the blue blend pretty much complete on the Contemptor. We've got a final piece then just to show exactly the same technique on the Vindicator. So starting from the bottom, working our way up, and you can definitely clearly see the colour transition now coming in with this slightly lighter mix. Again, just sort of feathering it upwards about a third of the way up the vehicle. And we'll do that all the way around as well. On the tops, I've kind of targeted the airbrush on sort of the larger panels, especially in the corners and so on. Like these front little panels again, and then that middle piece that you get, the same as a Rhino, Predator and all the others, I've just angled it in the middle. And you can see you've still got quite a bit of paint left over. Now that's quite important for when we move into the highlights, which we're going to do with a very decent pointed brush. Brush of your choice, Winsor & Newton, Artis Opus, whatever. It's I've got Artis Opus at the moment. These were a Christmas present, so that's what I've got. Before we move into the highlights though, we are going to shade in between the blue and where all the other details are with the classic liquid talent that is Nuln Oil. I found this works as a really good transition just to sort of hide, well, not really hide, but provide a decent contrast between the gold works that we're going to do on the trim, because that is the Thousand Suns standard 40k colour, and the blue. So very carefully running that into all of those little recesses between the edge trim and the blue armour panels. Now I'm not going to go through that entirely on the video. You've seen exactly how we're targeting it, and we just rinse and repeat that across all of the components of the model. Now we can move into the final stages of the blue highlights. So this is a 2-stage effect. We take our original blue paint, which is in that little pot, and this time we add a couple of little drops of white to taste. So this is going to be your first edge or thicker highlight that we're going to do on all the sharp corners and all those edge trims. So again, this is a bit of a trial and error to get the right blend, but you can kind of see I've added about 2 drops of white to this, and we'll do it exactly the same again. We'll add another 2 drops for the second stage a little bit later on. But what we're going to do is go around all of those edge joints and paint those in this colour. So this is your original mix, or your original airbrush highlight, but added with a little bit of white. And you can see there on the toes, they really begin to pop. So the blend underneath, and then these real stark edge highlights really begin to work. You see I'm using it on a homemade wet palette just to keep the paint liquid and flowing nicely. And we're just going to go around and be really, really careful at this point. If you do make a mistake, the idea is if you don't add the white into your mixing pot, add it on the palette, because then if you do make a mistake, you've still got that original mix that you can use just to touch in, certainly around the lower areas. You've still got your original blend mix to fill in if you do make a mistake. That is your you get out of jail free card, your your backward step should you need to do it, or you slip when you're doing an edge highlight like this, and then you want to try and blend that in a little bit to the original mix. So keep your original 2/3 Ahriman, 1/3 Thousand Suns in your pot, and then add the white on your palette. Just on these top leg grooves then, I'm just painting inside the lines. This is the GW style, just painting on those just inside the shade line that we created with our Nuln oil. Moving on to the sarcophagus then, we are painting all those edges again, so just follow your brush. Use the side of the brush, it does make it a little bit easier. You only really need the pointy piece when you're painting inside on the flat panels. Move the model around rather than the brush around. Try to paint in a single direction that's comfortable to you. So I'm going kind of bottom left to top right. It normally helps if you orientate the model rather than trying to move the brush around. So zooming in a little bit closer then, you can see the different transitions on my newspaper here, just to make sure that I've got the colour right mix. So that's something I'd recommend, you know, just sort of play around. This time then we're going to add a little bit more white to our final mix from the airbrush, and this will be our final edge highlight. Now what we're going to do is add this to the real peaks of the model. Hopefully my camera remains in focus. So we're not going to follow every sharp edge. We're just going to be aiming for the corners, the most prominent parts. So you can see here on the toes, this is a great example, is the top left and top right of each toe. And then on the 3 pieces of armour behind it, exactly the same thing. So it really begins to pop on those corners. Edges like on the armour here, on the leg armour. This again is inside the. There's no sharp edge here. You're painting it inside the shade line compared to where the detail is going to be. And we're just going to put that into each of the little corners. The same as the top here. I'm not going to run it all the way around where the original edge highlight is. We're just going to run it in each of those little corners just to make it stand out. Now this is one I've already done these stages on the Vindicator, and you can see that once you start putting these edge highlights on, the model does begin to pop. Yeah, that's where we're at with the box version. I've done a couple of extra stages on that. Admittedly, I've blocked in some black, I've painted some brass on there just as I was messing around and completely forgot to record that. But we'll cover those stages when we get to the Contemptor. But you can see exactly what we're talking about. This is now all dry. This is the stage we're going to end the video as we approach sort of the 18-minute mark. Hopefully you're still with me and you haven't fast forwarded too much. But that's where we're going to leave this video. Don't forget that we need to do those edge highlights on the weapon arms and those shoulder joints as well. And then we can move into part 3, which will be the final detail. So that's going to end this video, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you are following along, or at least have an idea on how I paint my Thousand Suns. This is a very similar technique to all the infantry, all the vehicles. You can do this pretty much to every blue piece on your Thousand Suns in the 40k scheme. If you did enjoy the video, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I shall catch you guys on the next video.